Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Holy Thursday presentation of the Two Wings Seminar, a production of the Holy Apostles Faculty. Pope John Paul II said that faith and reason are like two wings on which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of truth. And God has placed in the human heart a desire to know the truth, in a word, to know himself, so that, by knowing and loving God, men and women may also come to the fullness of truth about themselves. Today we have a special guest who is presenting with us, Lisa Fortini-Campbell, a Catholic evangelist and co-host with Father Joseph Hinchey of the Congregation of the Sacred Stigmata, of two WCAT radio shows, one entitled By His Wounds We Are Healed, and the other Duke in Altum. You can find these programs at WCATradio.com. Lisa Fortini-Campbell earned her doctorate in mass communications from the University of Washington in 1980 with an emphasis on motivational psychology and persuasion theory. She has served on the faculty of the Medill School of Journalism and the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University for the last 25 years. Lisa is a midlife convert to the Catholic faith and is orienting her work as an educator to encouraging fellow Christians in their faith. She is a frequent speaker at retreats, conferences, and parish missions. The reflection she offers here was originally given as a keynote to the priest of the Archdiocese of Chicago at the invitation of the late Cardinal George. An essay on her hospice work called "And the Last Shall Be Best" was recently published in Notre Dame magazine. So now I'd like to welcome to our show today, Dr. Lisa Fortini-Campbell.
My topic today is evangelization. That is, persuading others to open their hearts and minds to God. Persuasion, why we succeed and why we fail, is my area of work and study, and I've been at it now for almost 40 years. So, what have I learned after all this time? Just the simple truth that on the really big and important issues of life, we rarely persuade anyone of anything. People only persuade themselves. I know this sounds rather strong, but think about it for a moment. How easily could you get your elderly father to move into assisted living if he didn't want to go? Or your sister to get out of a destructive romantic relationship? Or your brother-in-law to stop drinking? Or, frankly, any of the many other things we try to get people we love to do for their own good. We've all reasoned and argued, begged and pleaded, warned and admonished, and gotten exactly nowhere. But then, something happens. Your dad falls at home, and there's no one to help him. Your sister witnesses the undeniable evidence her paramour has been lying to her. Your brother-in-law wakes up one morning and can't remember anything about the night before. And suddenly, the change you've been trying to persuade them to make without avail seems to happen all by itself. Fascinating. Bringing another person to God, we would all agree, is one of those huge challenges. But if we can't even get our fathers to move house, how can we move the faithless, reinvigorate the lapsed, and bring them all home to the Catholic Church? But there's hope, always hope. Because the other thing I've learned is that we can increase our chances of success if we come at the problem indirectly and just learn to help others persuade themselves. This is the approach that I'd like to explore with you today. The title of my talk, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, comes from the 1967 movie of the same name. If you've seen it, you know it starred Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn as Matt and Christina Drayton. He's a liberal-minded San Francisco newspaper man, and she's a liberal-minded art dealer. But their pride and joy is their daughter Joanna, a glorious, happy, loving, open-hearted young woman. She's just come home to surprise her parents with the news that she's fallen in love with the perfect man, the love of her heart, the mate of her soul, and they're going to be married. Her parents are delighted. That is, until they meet him. He's played by the fine African-American actor Sidney Poitier. Now, Joanna no more notices the color of a person's skin than she notices the color of his eyes, unless, of course, they are twinkling with laughter or full of compassion or shining with love. She is exactly as her parents have raised her to be. So what's the problem? Surely there's no rational reason to object. Her fiancé, John Prentice, is every parent's dream. He's a successful doctor, a specialist in infectious diseases dedicated to serving others, compassionate, intelligent, honorable, respectful, and sincere. He obviously loves Joanna with his whole heart. So what's the problem? Well, as another character in the movie, their friend the Monsignor, puts it, lovingly but bluntly, it's always interesting to watch an old, broken-down, phony liberal come face to face with his principles. And that is the crux of the problem, isn't it? Joanna's parents are caught between a rock and a hard place. Intellectually, they believe in those liberal principles, but now that their own daughter wants to marry a black man, well, the stomach twists, the head pounds, and the heartburn starts. This is about as uncomfortable as human psychology gets. We hate this kind of discomfort, and we want it to go away. Making it go away is easy. All a person has to do is let go of one of their two contradictory ideas. But which one? Do they hang on to their prejudice, forbid the marriage, alienate their beloved daughter, and show the world they're hypocrites? Or do they let go of their prejudice and judge this man not on the color of his skin, but on the quality of his character, and bless an interracial marriage? If you haven't seen it, I'm now going to spoil the movie for you. Like trapeze artists flying through the air, arms stretched out in trust, Matt and Christina let go of the comfort of their prejudice and reach toward love. They bless the marriage. In their hearts and in their minds and in their actions, they've changed. They've been converted, you could say, in one of the deepest ways a person can be converted, from hard-hearted prejudice to colorblind love. But then that's just a movie, right? In 1924, serving a 6-year sentence for sedition, Mohandas K. Gandhi begins to write the story of his life. He tells of an incident in 1893 when, as a new barrister beginning his work in South Africa, he buys a first-class train ticket. I'm sure you know the famous story. He presents his ticket to the conductor only to be denied his seat on the train. And when he protests, he's thrown off and beaten. Determined to get to his destination, Gandhi buys a stagecoach ticket to Johannesburg. But once again, the driver won't let him sit inside the coach. He makes him sit outside with the luggage instead. Describing what happened next, Gandhi writes, "At about 3 o'clock, the coach reached Partakoff. Now a man desired to sit where I was seated, as he wanted to smoke and possibly have some fresh air. So he took a piece of dirty sackcloth from the driver, spread it on the footboard, and addressing me, said, 'Sami, you sit on this. I want to sit where you are.' The insult was more than I could bear. In fear and trembling, I said to him, 'It was you who seated me here, though I should have been accommodated inside. I put up with the insult. Now that you want to sit outside and smoke, you would have me sit at your feet. I will not do so.' As I was struggling with these sentences, the man came down upon me and began heavily to box my ears. He seized me by the arm and tried to drag me down. I clung to the brass rails of the coach box and was determined to keep my hold, even at the risk of breaking my wrist bones. The passengers inside the coach were witnessing the scene. The man swearing at me, dragging and belaboring me, and I remaining still. He was strong, and I was weak. Some of the passengers were moved to pity and exclaimed, "Let him alone, don't beat him. He is not to blame, he is right. If he can't stay there, let him come and sit with us." Caught in another version of Matt and Christina's dilemma, these passengers could not watch a fellow man, Indian though he may be, suffer and square it with their own ideas of human dignity. Either they would have to decide Gandhi wasn't fully human, or the beating was intolerable. Under that pressure, their hearts melted, their minds changed, and their actions followed suit as they cried out, "Stop, stop! Let him come and sit with us." A beautiful epiphany of conversion. But that's just a story told by an old man writing his own hagiography, right? A woman has a friend named Brad. He's a luminous, kind-hearted, generous, loving man, and something about him just draws her. As she comes to know him better, she learns he's an evangelical Christian. He belongs to Willow Creek Community Church in Barrington. One day he invites her to go to church with him. She has seriously mixed feelings. While she admires her friend, she knows there isn't any God. And worse, she's heard about Willow Creek. Willow Creek is full of weird people, Bible-thumping, holy rollers waving their hands around in some unself-conscious display of ecstasy. Maybe that's how Brad is when he's there, too, and if he is, maybe she'll have to decide she doesn't like him so much after all. But the attractiveness of her friend overcomes her reservations, and she decides to take the risk and go. Sitting among 5,000 other people on that evening in November 2007, she listens to Bill Hybels, the pastor, tell the story of Samuel and Eli and the way that God calls us even when we aren't listening, even when we think we can't hear, and even when we don't know it's Him. All we need to say is, "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening." And without any conscious will, something in her heart sighs, "I wish God would call me." And so He does. Does that sound a little like a fairy tale? Perhaps so. Except that woman was me. We can call it a lovely story, but I think we should call it by its proper name: conversion. The change of heart and mind that causes us to embrace God's love. It's the end goal of evangelization. The new evangelization presents us with a daunting task. There is so much to do. There are so many people sitting at our masses who are present but not engaged. There are people who call themselves Catholic but rarely attend church. There are those who, for a variety of reasons, have stayed away for decades. There are people who have rejected the Catholic Church entirely. There are those people who have rejected any faith completely. And there are those who haven't even thought about faith long enough to know whether they accept it or reject it. Who can possibly boil this ocean? Well, I'm here to tell you I can. In the 3 stories I've just told you, one from a 50-year-old movie, in the life of Gandhi, and in my own experience, real conversions happened. But not in the way we usually think of them happening, that is, by someone deliberately trying to convince another person to come to a change of heart. Rather, in all of these cases, the closed-mindedness and hard-heartedness that stood in the way of racial unity, social equality, and openness to God destroyed themselves in the judo maneuver the psychologists call cognitive dissonance. We've all experienced cognitive dissonance. It happens when our view of a person or a situation is profoundly contradicted by some experience. The contradiction makes us uncomfortable, and the discomfort won't go away until we let go of one of the ideas causing the conflict. A friend of mine told me a story about his brother who had faithfully promised their mother that he wouldn't drink until he was 21 years old. So on the day that their mother saw a photo of her son at a raucous party holding up a stein of beer with a lot of other young people doing the same thing, she said, "Ah, yes, but Jimmy's stein was full of water." This is dissonance reduction at its finest. Now, of course, it could have gone the other way. She could have said, "My son is an underage drinker and he lied to me." But she didn't. Dissonance reduction always takes the path of least resistance. All of us think things and believe things about the deep issues of life, including race, social equality, and faith. They are the result of our personal experiences, the things we've been taught, the things we read, and the example of others. We hold on tight to them, confident in our rightness, that is, until we encounter something that so thoroughly unsettles us, we have no choice but to rethink. The Draytons were proud of their racial tolerance until, that is, they saw themselves panic at the thought of their daughter marrying a black man. The white people sitting inside a South African stagecoach were comfortable with their racial superiority, until, overcome with horror, they watched someone beat a defenseless man. I was totally confident that God was a cultural anachronism until I was irresistibly drawn to someone who told me his light comes from his faith in Christ Jesus. No matter what he or she has read or heard or experienced, every atheist, every secularist, every ex-Catholic, every person of another faith, every disheartened cradle Catholic somewhere in his or her life right now knows a faithful Catholic, respects a loving Catholic, or loves a joyful Catholic. This has the potential to deeply unsettle them if we make it our purpose to make sure they see the luminous Christian people we are. Caught in the dissonance between what they think and what they see, they will begin to soften their own hard-heartedness, open up their closed minds, and reconsider their skepticism as they respond to the real people they know and respect and love, their faithful Catholic mothers and sons, their joyful Catholic sisters and friends, their loving Catholic neighbors and colleagues. It's the path of least resistance, after all. At least that's what my own experiences have taught me. I'll start with my mom. My Lutheran mother is a sweet and good lady with deep-seated negative attitudes about Catholics. They have nothing to do with Martin Luther and the Reformation. They have to do with the people she's known. My mom thinks Catholics are hidebound, rigid, and at the extreme, hard-hearted and uncaring. I remember when I called her on the phone to tell her I intended to become a Catholic. Her incredulous voice on the other end of the line shot back, "You've got to be kidding me." And now her own daughter is one of them. Imagine the poor woman's consternation. My Italian father, a scientist and engineer, left the Catholic Church 70 years ago in a huff, exasperated by its anti-intellectualism. And now his smart daughter with her PhD is a Catholic convert. My husband is a thoroughly virtuous man, as anyone who knows him will tell you. All of it lived independently of a foundation in faith. And now his wife of 43 years, who has always thought and lived just as he has, is a thoroughly converted absolutely sincere Catholic. My best girlfriend is a passionate secularist who loathes all organized religion for its overbearing, intolerant attempts to brainwash people. Mention church and the vein in her forehead starts to throb. And now her independent-minded best friend converts to the mother of all religions, the Catholic Church, at 53, an age when she ought to know better. My good colleague is a lifelong Catholic and is with a heart weighed down by decades of scandal and corruption in the church. Her exhaustion and misery dearly want company. But now she sits across the table from someone who chose this faith, with no one to push her, as an adult and as a woman, and even seems happy about it. All of these people, and dozens more like them, my family, my friends, my neighbors, my colleagues, my students, even my acquaintances, have had to make big changes in their settled view of the world now that I'm Catholic. Do they hold tight to their skepticism or rejection of Catholics and reject me too? Or do they hold tight to the love and respect they've always had for me? Look at the sincerity on my face and reconsider what they've always thought and felt about those Catholics. When I first told people I was converting, I can honestly say I was afraid about what they'd decide. I was afraid I'd lose friends, be on an uncomfortable footing with my family, and be an object of suspicion to my neighbors and colleagues. I was afraid I'd be an object of ridicule to people who know me less well. And while I knew my husband wouldn't leave me, I had no idea what the consequence would be for our relationship. It would be our first significant separation of mind and heart in the nearly half-century we've known each other. But you know what? None of it happened. None of it. After writhing for a while in their dissonance, each and every one of them let their love and respect for me override their skepticism and melt their hardness of heart. They've changed the way they think about us Catholics. And more than that, they've changed what they do. My Lutheran mom happily came to my confirmation and goes to Mass every day with me when she visits from Cleveland. My husband spent both Christmas and Easter weeks helping me care for the 12 Marist and Stigmatine priests I've adopted in Waltham, Massachusetts. My sad, weary, heavy-hearted Catholic colleague asks to go to church with me. My father sent a priest money to have Masses said for me and has himself gone back to church, albeit a Lutheran one, and calls to tell me what the good lady minister had to say from the pulpit that week. And it's more than that. My formerly contemptuous secular friend now skips over an anti-Catholic article in the New York Times or sends it on to me saying, "These people ought to know more people like you," rather than, "How can a woman in her right mind associate herself with this bunch?" My best friend, whose forehead veins used to throb at the mention of any organized religion, defends Catholics at a dinner party rather than join in the butchery. And at my confirmation, she gave me a cross to wear around my neck. And my ardently Jewish friend left me a voicemail last month and said, "Lisa, I know we haven't seen each other in a year, but I've seen a play and I can't get it out of my mind, and I wonder, will you come to New York and teach me about Mary?" So what have I done to make all of this happen? Nothing. I've just been me. Except that me is a little different than she used to be. Now when you see me, you see a woman who loves God and is proud to be a Catholic. You see a Catholic who is joyful, even if she's not always happy. You see a woman who is thoroughly modern and loves her 2,000-year-old church, who can acknowledge its failures and be undaunted by them. One who is happily female and knows that she contributes value equal to anyone's. But more than anything else, when you're with me, You know a Catholic loves you, no matter who you are or what you believe. In my small, ordinary way, I like to think I'm just doing what Jesus did when he was the one who came to dinner all those years ago. Without a house of his own, Jesus often ate at other people's houses. He went where he was invited. Sometimes he ate at the homes of friends like Mary and Martha and Lazarus. But Christ was more famous, even infamous, for accepting invitations to eat with the pariahs of his society, the tax collectors and prostitutes and all manner of sinners. We don't know precisely what he said to them at all of those meals, but I bet we all know what he did. He made them feel loved. Imagine those people. They knew what society thought of them, those prostitutes and tax collectors. They were scorned and ostracized. But here is a man who comes to dinner anyway, accepting their hospitality and jumping clean over the social barrier that kept the good away from the bad in those days. Jesus of Nazareth is here with me at dinner. He's not like me, they think, but he loves me. He knows the worst about me, and he loves me anyway. He risks himself to be seen with me. He will break bread with me. What is going on here? Surely they were dumbfounded by the dissonance. And there are only two ways out of this dilemma. Either they had to decide this man was crazy, or consider that they were actually more lovable than they thought. We all know what they decided, for many followed him. I wonder sometimes how much more progress we might make in the new evangelization if we were more conscious of our call to truly love people on the other side of our Catholic and Christian boundaries, just as Jesus loved them. Will you give me a drink? Jesus says to the woman at the well. Astonished, she replies, You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? Eternal drink. Obviously, she was confounded right away, and then he makes it worse. He asks her about her husband. He knows what she's done, and he loves her just the same. And then he promises her eternal life. Her world can turn completely upside down. She runs to tell everyone what's happened, and the people come and urge him to stay. He spends 2 days in Samaria, and conversions happen all over town. The Gospel of John says, And because of his words, many more became believers. They said to the woman, We no longer believe just because of what you said. Now we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this man really is the Savior of the world. The woman of Samaria was converted by Jesus' completely unexpected and totally called for love. The story she told of her experience softened the hearts of many others. Then God himself walked into Samaria on the path she had leveled and did the rest. And this is what I pray each day. In my small way, let me do what she did and make the path straight for the Lord. Can I do this? One ordinary Catholic woman? Can I be an instrument of love's judo and unsettle the world around me? Yes, I can. Be luminous. He tells us, You are the light of the world. Let your light shine so before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Be loving. He exhorts, A new commandment in love I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you. So, as I have learned in many homilies over these short years of my Catholic life, if we cooperate with him in light and in love, then through us, he will change the world. 2012 was quite a year for me and for my husband Alan because we spent most of it on the East Coast caring for our friend Father Joseph Henchy. I met Father Joe back in 2009 during his last few months at Mundelein Seminary through a priest who had been his student. When Father Joe left Mundelein to take a position at Dunwoody Seminary in New York, we stayed in touch and gradually became good friends. At the beginning of 2012, it became clear that something was very wrong with his health. Long investigation revealed it to be the early stage of pancreatic cancer. Father Joe needed a complex and dangerous surgery, so Alan and I moved to New York for several months to stay with him in the hospital and in rehab and watch over him until he could return to work. None of this being easy for an 82-year-old man. But he battled his way through months of setbacks to recover, and he returned to work in time for the fall semester. Then in November, I got a call in the middle of the night telling me Father Joe was at the hospital and about to undergo emergency stomach surgery. I flew to New York that morning and stayed with him for the 12 days he was in the hospital. When he was released, he wasn't so debilitated that he needed to go into rehab, but he did need a week of close care before the doctors would allow him to travel to his religious order's retirement home near Boston. I volunteered to stay and care for him. His provincial agreed, and the rector offered me a room at the seminary. During that week, I did all of the things that all caregivers everywhere do for their loved ones. I prepared his food and helped him shave. I ran his errands, gave him his medicines, talked to his doctors, answered his email, and we prayed the daily offices. Late one evening, when I was carrying a basin of dirty dishes down to the kitchen, I ran into one of the seminarians. He was in his second year of theology and offered to carry the dishes for me. As we walked along together, he said, "You know, Lisa, we study love every day in our classes, but now we watch it walk in the hallways. I'll never forget this, not for the rest of my life." Just describing that moment never fails to bring tears to my eyes because it was such a beautiful compliment. But it also filled me with another feeling that's hard to describe, except that it was something like fear. In that moment, I suddenly realized how much real power God has given me to affect other people, to encourage a young man at the dawn of his vocation by doing something as small as washing the dishes of a sick and elderly priest. And dear God, if I have that much power to encourage, do I not have an equal and opposite power to discourage? By failing to act with the love and kindness a Christian woman is supposed to have at the very center of her being? A few weeks ago, I had the chance to read something of Gaudium et Spes. The last sentence of the section on the causes of atheism jumped right off the page. Believers can thus have more than a little to do with the rise of atheism. To the extent that they are careless about their instruction in the faith, or present its teaching falsely, or even fail in their religious, moral, and social life, they must be said to conceal, rather than to reveal, the true nature of God and religion. Isn't that the most horrible thought? That I could be the one who conceals the face of God? Yes, we little people have power, immense power, to affect other people's experiences of God, to conceal him or reveal him. Does that frighten you? It frightens me. So if I am ever inclined to ask myself why the part of our culture hostile to faith continues to advance and hold ever greater numbers of people, then I'm afraid I have to ask myself if I'm the one who has retreated. Do I retreat when I'm the reader at Mass and come unprepared to communicate the power of those words? Maybe the only words of Scripture someone will hear all week, to my brothers and sisters in the pews? Do I retreat when I'm too shy to say grace in a restaurant, or hesitant to wear a crucifix in the classroom for fear of what people will think. When I tell someone who wants to go out on a Sunday morning that I have to go to Mass instead of I'm going to Mass. When I don't introduce myself to the stranger sitting next to me at church and offer him a word of welcome. When I let my attention wander during the homily and discourage the priest who has worked so hard to prepare it with my slack and unresponsive face. When I don't talk about God's blessings in my life as readily as I talk about my husband and my work. And when the fact that I'm a Catholic is one of the last things people learn about me rather than one of the first. It bears thought. The days went by and Father Joe got better, and soon it was Thanksgiving. The house was empty except for me and Father Joe and 3 seminarians with nowhere else to go. So we 5 made a party of it and reheated the food the chef left for us and set it on the table with a white cloth, candles, and flowers. We had lots of fun chatting away and getting to know one another better. Then one of the seminarians asked me how I first met Father Joe. And so the whole happy story spilled out. Brad in Willow Creek, catechesis with my friend Father Peter, my first confession with Father Joe, my confirmation, and all the little stories about the way God has blessed my life, including the time when I decided to try to remember every blessing that happened on a certain day, but that by 8 a.m, I'd already lost track because there were so many. I babbled along, and suddenly I noticed the tears in his eyes. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Lisa," he replied, "do you know how seldom we have a conversation like this at the seminary? We talk about our professors and complain about our workload, and we talk about the news and sports and our families and friends, but I don't know that I've ever had a real conversation with any of my classmates about the ways I experience God in my life." "Why not?" I asked. He said, "I don't know. Maybe we're embarrassed. Maybe it seems too intimate. I don't know. But I'm glad you did. The stories make me really happy to hear." And as happy as it made me to hear him say so, that ominous feeling seeped through my veins all over again. How many stories of God do we carry in our hearts and never tell anyone? How many people would be uplifted by our stories and their own courage strengthened if only they knew? How much more would I be strengthened if I had a chance to hear theirs? I told a friend of mine about this, and she said, "Well, Lisa, I think we Catholics have been taught not to brag." "But Elaine," I said, "it's not bragging, it's witness." "Yes, dear, I know," she replied, "but it's possible that sometimes your experiences could make someone who hasn't had similar ones feel bad or jealous. Maybe it's just better to keep them to yourself." I don't agree. And if my stories make someone else feel bad, then I'm telling them the wrong way, and I'd better learn how to do it right. Because to fail to tell them is to fail to let the branches of encouragement bind us to each other so that a vine becomes so thick and strong that Christ is unassailable. And the stronger I feel, the braver I get. I was giving a capstone lecture to a group of executives at the university and wanted to show how important self-examination, discipline, and courage are to the development of leadership. For each point, I gave a personal example and recommended a book. About the importance of self-reflection, I told them about the day when I was a reader at an afternoon mass and read out that beautiful passage on love from St. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. I told them that in his homily, the celebrant asked us all to replace the word love with the word I and ask ourselves, am I patient? Am I kind? Am I not envious? Do I forgive all? Of course, none of us could hold our heads up under the reflection of that question, but we could all vow to do better. For the importance of discipline, I gave them an example from my yoga practice, and for the value of courage, I told them about how important it is in their work to stay connected to their higher purpose. I read them Mother Teresa's beautiful poem that ends, What you spend years building, someone could destroy overnight. Build it anyway. The good you do today, people will often forget tomorrow. Do good anyway. Give the world the best you have, and it may never be enough. Give the world the best you've got anyway. You see, in the final analysis, it is between you and your God. It was never between you and them anyway. As I stood in front of those 25 executives from all over the world, I watched tears well up in their eyes. No one got mad. No one stomped out. And no one threw tomatoes because I dared to use religious examples to talk about leadership in a secular university. And when people came down to say goodbye, one woman took my hands and said, "That was beautiful. I'm from Australia and I'm Catholic too. I went to Holy Name Cathedral this weekend. How wonderful. Had I known you were here, I would have gone to Mass with you every day this week." A man approached me next. "I was amazed that you would stand in front of the room and say those things. I'm Christian, and it would never have occurred to me to do that. I would have been too afraid. But now maybe I ought to rethink my fear." And last, a man from Malaysia greeted me and said, "I am a Muslim, and I am honored to meet a woman of faith." I was overwhelmed again. How much power of witness do we hide in fear of someone disliking us? Have we taped over our mouths in vast swaths of our life because we believe the views of others must not be disturbed, except in fistfights in the media? Do we let the protests of a few overwhelm the silent yearning of many? Am I complicit? Dear God. Will I get myself into trouble someday? Maybe. But if in fearing one reprimand I miss 99 opportunities to encourage another person, then I've made a very bad bargain indeed. I am Catholic the way I am female. It is who I am, and I will not be ashamed. Luminous and loving. I pray God grant me that much every day. And so last week I was having lunch with my friend Rick, the secular Jew who has decided that Catholics aren't so bad after all. Rick has just come back from a cultural tour of the Holy Land and brought me a souvenir, a little keychain with a Jerusalem cross carved from olive wood hanging on it. He handed it to me and said, "Sold by a Muslim to a Jew for a Catholic." And we laughed. We chatted a while, and I told him about this talk and that I would be making the point that if we want the new evangelization to progress, then we need to go out and be luminous and loving Christians, one day at a time and one person at a time, and unsettle the world. He said, "Well, that's all well and good, Lisa, but doing that is going to take forever. The Catholic Church has big problems, and you need to find a way to leverage your idea and scale it up to a much bigger audience fast before the whole thing collapses around your ears." I smiled at him and nodded. And then I gave him a lesson on scalability, Christian style. If you have faith the size of a mustard seed, hope the size of a mustard seed, love the size of a mustard seed, you can. And so, dear friends, shall we all go together and move some mountains for God? Thank you all for listening.
Hello, Lisa.
Hello, Sebastian.
How are you doing today? That was a powerful testimony.
Well, I thank you very much. It was a joy to be able to do, and hope it's of interest to the people who have a chance to listen.
I've got one question for you. You said something that interested me very much because it's something that I've experienced as well. If I'm in a restaurant and I want to pray with my family before we eat, I'm automatically going to assume that the people on the tables around me are going to be hostile to that idea that I'm going to be bringing God into their environment.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, I think the reason it is we see so much hostility in the general and broad media. I think we hear about hostility to faith in so many news articles these days, and we see that expressed in these anonymous forums like Twitter and comment feeds on things we might read. But in my experience after all of this time, I have never actually encountered a hostile person to any expression of faith that is simply a manifestation of who I am. Now, maybe I would get some hostility if I walked up to people and asked them if they'd accepted Jesus Christ as their personal Savior on my first handshake with them, but I don't do that. And so to pray in a restaurant or to say, God bless you, or to wear a little cross or medal around my neck, or to talk about what I'm doing this Easter on Sunday, I just don't encounter hostility. So I think we've allowed ourselves to be muted in this way for fear that out there around us is something that really is, it exists, but probably not in the normal lives you and I are going to have.
And that's what makes your point, I think, about expressing your faith and just being who you are all the more important. I haven't experienced hostility at any occasion, or on any occasion where I've prayed in public. Yet, for some reason, in the back of my mind, I brace myself for it in case it happens.
Sure, and I suppose it might at some point, but can you imagine in a restaurant people at a table nearby intruding on the privacy of a stranger to criticize the fact that they're praying? I can't imagine people doing that. And I've never had that experience at all. And so if people may look at it as if it's a little exotic, perhaps so. You just don't see it very often. But it's always done in a quiet and dignified way. And I guess for me, the bigger question is whether or not praying with people at the table with you who may not be so much people of faith yourself, then maybe you feel a little awkward. And so sometimes in a setting like that, I'll bow my own head and just say something silently, or request if it would bother anybody if I did. And I've never had anybody say that it would.
It's a very good point. Be the light Christ has made us to be in the world. So
that's right.
And if we pray, maybe the people on the table next to us will be encouraged to pray themselves.
Yes, well, it might very well be, because in fact, early on, I didn't do it out of the fear you express or calling attention to myself, and I was actually at the university one day in the common lunchroom, and there were a few guests at another table, women from somewhere in Asia, maybe Indonesia, maybe Malaysia, Thailand, I couldn't tell. But before they started their meal, they bowed down, blessed themselves, and prayed. And I thought to myself, watching them from a distance, I thought, what is the matter with me that I didn't do that? And so someone inspired me, and so maybe you're right, Sebastian. Somebody who watches me or you will be inspired too.
You've written a book called Happy Catholics that's going to be published sometime this year. Could you talk about that a little bit? Well, what inspired you to put in writing what you've articulated in part in conversation during this hour?
Well, it's hard to explain exactly because it wasn't exactly intentional. It was very near the time of my confirmation back in 2009, and shortly beforehand, I'd had some correspondence with a very dear friend of mine in Wales that I really correspond with, despite my affection for her, much less often than I should or would like to, and vice versa. So Allison and I don't talk much, but she knew I was coming up on my confirmation, and she just wanted to know what was up with me and why it had happened, and just out of loving curiosity. And so I started writing Allison an email, and 10 days later there were 113 pages. And it was a kind of a very strange experience, actually. I know other people who have said that sometimes they feel like almost they're taking dictation from somewhere that is not them, and in a way that was my experience too. And so what it is really is the autobiography of what happened, how it happened, really very much in the mode of, I guess you would call it, confessional literature, but it's the story of what happened and why. And I gave it as a confirmation gift to the three people who had been absolutely instrumental in my conversion. One, a person who helped get it all started, an evangelical Christian. Second of all, my husband, who is not a person of faith at all. And third, a Catholic priest who helped me along too. So those three, it was a gift to those three men on my confirmation, and no one else really has read it since then. But you've been talking to me about maybe putting it out as something that would inspire other people. It's a personal story, but not a private one, and it's something that it is an introspective, more like a diary kind of thing than anything that's self-analytical. So that's what it is.
Certainly, and as you say, there is a genre for literature like that, and it's perhaps a book that will inspire others in their own first steps in faith as they wobble a bit, and then as they take off leaping with great joy and bounding across the faithscape, if you will. A good friend of mine once told me that man wasn't meant to walk on the ground. He was meant to soar in the heavens. And that's a very strong analogy if you consider the fact that most of us live between the tops of our heads and the bottoms of our feet.
It is hard to live in the world and not be of this world. And so encouraging each other while we can do that, the work that you do, the work your colleagues do, the people who listen, all of us who participate in one way or another are helping keep all of us, our wings flapping.
Well, we only have a few minutes left. Is there any action steps or call to action or something that you would advise somebody who's listened to your program today, something you would advise them to do this weekend as we move through our Triduum season and enter into the glory of our Easter season to help prepare them for the road that lies ahead?
Well, I would say that my idea would really come just in a few very small ideas, frankly. You know, I think one of the things that I have always gone to and hope other people would too is a drawing on and a leaning on my friends who are spiritual people and faithful people. They just make such a difference. And to be able to have a conversation about faith and love with someone else is wonderful. So one little thing to do would be find a way sometime this weekend to tell someone a story of your experience of God and ask to hear someone else's too. And I think also, you know, we need to prune ourselves from some discouragement. It's so easy to be discouraged, and I think that we just need to try to let it go. And so if there is anything that begins to discourage you, you go to Mass perhaps and there aren't as many people as you think there should be, or something isn't quite what you want, just kick the thought out, because that kind of discouragement undercuts the joy that you are. And of course, that I just think that the more you let your joy animate your life, that you express it, that it is one of these things that will grow, and if you keep the discouragement pruned away. And just think that I like G.K. Chesterton once, who said that every human interaction is an opportunity either to encourage or discourage our fellow man. And so even though that seems like a strong thing to say, you think about how much someone can change the quality of your day just by the way he says good morning. And so, you know, think about it. How do you make a person feel when you take an extra minute after church to inquire about something going on in her life, or to say hello, or just to be able to do something little with the goal of being a joyful, encouraging, loving Catholic to the people around you.
Well, those are beautiful ideas to pursue as we prepare for our Mass tonight and for the rest of the Triduum. This is a beautiful week because it's the one week in the year that spans 3 liturgical seasons. We close Lent, we go through an entire liturgical season, the Triduum, and we come out on the other side on Easter Sunday. So with all the promise that involves.
Yes, and our hearts full of joy, and that's where we want to be all the time. I think sometimes that we forget we are Easter people, and our hearts should be full of joy.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. We've been talking today with Dr. Lisa Fortini-Campbell. Dr. Campbell, thank you for being here with us today.
You're very welcome, and I thank you for asking, and I thank everyone for listening.
And until next week, have a blessed Easter season, all of our listeners, and we'll see you back here next Thursday for another episode of the Two Wings Seminar, a production of the Holy Apostles Faculty. God bless you, Lisa.
Thank you, Sebastian, and you as well.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.